It's finally here. Helldivers 2 has just released the game's largest update in my opinion, combining both a major update with a new warbond. And as we always do on this channel, let's go over everything that's been changed in this update. We got a lot here to go over, so let's jump right into it. Starting off, we've got the very underused rocket Sentry. They've decreased the spread of the rockets. It prioritizes now larger targets, which is definitely necessary on Rocket Sentry so as to not waste those precious rockets on little guys. And they've also increased its target distance by 25 meters, going from 75 to 100. They've decreased the rockets per salvo from 2 to 1 to be more ammo efficient, and they've also increased its explosion radius by 3 meters, making it a bit better at clearing smaller guys as well. They've decreased the explosion armor penetration, but just the explosion. The projectile still penetrates heavy armors, which they've gone ahead and increased that projectile damage by 50%, going from 200 to 300. Overall, they've made the Rocket Sentry a lot stronger in both damage against the larger targets, as well as improved its killing potential for little guys with its explosion radius increase. The very weak Machine Gun Sentry has had its cooldown decreased by a whole minute, going from 3 minutes to 2 minutes, which is 120 seconds, which I still don't really think this stratagem will ever be worth the stratagem cost unless you're playing at very low difficulties where armor targets aren't as present. But hey, it's definitely better now at those difficulty ranges. For the machine gun, Gatling gun, rocket, autocannon, and both mortar sentries, they've increased their durability from 0% all the way to 80%, which, simplifying it, these sentries are just going to be a lot tankier and resistant against enemy and helldiver damage, making them a bit more powerful. The HMG Emplacement has gotten a full 100% increase in rotation speed, making the turning of it very smooth and definitely giving it an upgrade for dealing with multiple enemies when switching from target to target. The anti-personnel mines have had their explosion damage increase from 250 to 350 damage, and I've gone ahead and looked at a database of a couple of enemies' health pools, and seems like this mostly targets automatons. The Incendiary mines have had their explosion damage increase from 150 to 210, which is actually quite decent, now only taking 1 mine plus its fire damage to deal with warriors, for example. The Orbital Gatling has had some massive buffs done to it, and I really want to test this one out. Its fire rate has been increased by 25%. It also has had its rounds per salvo doubled, which is really good. And on top of that, it has had its armor penetration increased, which can now damage heavy armored units. And even further, it has had its cooldown decreased by 10 seconds, from 80 to 70 seconds. And this looks like a massive buff, and it looks like it's going to be a very viable tool to use, especially against automatons. I for one can't wait to test it out. The Orbital Precision Strike has also had a buff. Its cooldown was decreased from 100 seconds to 90 seconds, and its call-in time has been halved, from 4 seconds to only 2 now, making it overall much easier to land those orbital precision strikes and getting them a tad bit more frequently. The Airburst strike, which in my opinion, just like the machine gun Sentry, has no place in higher difficulties, has had its cooldown decreased by 20 seconds, from 120 seconds to now 100. The Eagle 110mm rocket pods have had some changes as well, and they've gone ahead and warned us with this text. While these changes may look like a straight up nerf, that is not the intention. Please see the blog post for more information. And we'll look at that in 1 second. First, let's see the changes. They've improved its targeting. They've also increased projectile armor penetration. Now does 100% damage to heavily armored units instead of 50, but they've gone ahead and decreased projectile damage from 600 to 250 to compensate for the improved targeting and the extra damage from the increased armor penetration. And they've also decreased explosion armor penetration, which can no longer damage heavily armored units. In the blog post, they've stated that the rocket pods were very inconsistent at dealing with its main targets, the heavily armored units. So they're trying to make it more consistent at dealing with those targets, but it will still not be a surefire way to outright kill them. It should, however, always soften up a target in some way. Now, my 2 cents, I think what they're intending for here is, for example, to use rocket pods on Bile Titans and blow up their back armor. And with that being done, it allows Helldivers to finish off these massive units with more ease. I would expect it to still one-hit tanks, but we'll have to see. The Eagle Strafing run has also received the buff. They've increased its uses from 3 to 4 and increased its armor penetration, which can now damage heavily armored units. Eagle Strafing runs is supposed to be a tool to effectively damage with small groups of medium armored units, and now can also soften up heavy armored units as well. The grenade launcher has had its damage increased by a tiny bit, going from 350 to 400, and now we go on to one of the worst support weapons in the game as of right now, the heavy machine gun. Let's see what they've got in store for it. They've increased its damage from 100 to 150, which is pretty good, a full 50% damage increase. They've also increased its durable damage against durable body parts from 23 to 33%, and they've decreased its fire rate, which is okay I guess, to better conserve its ammo, and they've reduced its reload time by 1.5 seconds, going from a full 7 seconds to 5.5 seconds. And lastly, they increased its stagger strength. I'm really curious to test this one out for myself. I'll have a video on it as soon as I can get around to it, but overall, it seems like a pretty powerful buff done to it. I'm reluctant to get excited about it, seeing how I found this weapon to be previously very disappointing, but we'll have to see. The MG43 machine gun has also had a reload time buff, overall decreasing it by a half second, and increase its max amount of magazines from 3 to 4. Overall, just giving the weapon a bit better ammo economy. Now back to the machine gun Sentry, but also the machine gun support weapon, the Gatling Sentry gun, and the Patriot Exosuit Gatling weapon. They've had their damage increased by 10, going from 80 to 90 damage. They've also had its durable damage increase from 7.5 to 25%. This is really good. Overall, all of these weapons should be better at dealing with slightly tougher units. For example, when you're using the machine gun support weapon and you're shooting at a tank's weak spot, you should notice the machine gun being able to take those units far faster. But there's a lot of other units. But yeah, we've also seen increase in durable damage in various other weapons. Again, durable damage simplifying is essentially you'll be able to do more damage against slightly tankier units. Okay, so just keep that in mind. The Liberator, Stalwart, and the Guard Dog have had its durable damage increase from 10% to 23%, and the Liberator Concussive from 23% to 35%. The Adjudicator as well from 10% to 20%, but also a magazine capacity increased by 5, which brings it from 25 to 30. Also, on the Tenderizer, we've also had a durable damage increase from 10% to 17%, but also a big 35 damage increase from 60 to 95%, which is more than a 50% damage increase. That's pretty good. However, to compensate, the ammo was decreased from 35 to 30 and the number of magazines from 10 to 8. We've also gotten an increase in its stagger, and I for one can't wait to give this weapon another try. It was one of the most underwhelming weapons in the previous war bond, so I'm really excited to see this. The Plas 101 Purifier, which was also in the last war bond, has had its projectile armor penetration increased to match the armor penetration from the explosion, which I went ahead and checked out what it was, and the explosion armor penetration was 3, which the bullets now match, meaning you can now damage medium armored units such as the Hive Guard's front armor, for example. They've also decreased the explosion damage fall off, making the explosions more powerful at clearing small hordes. The explosive crossbow has once again received a buff, attempting to save this weapon. Just like the Purifier, they've increased the explosion armor penetration to be the same as the projectile. Once again, I looked, and just like the Purifier, that means a 3 armor penetration, once again, meaning that now the explosion damage will harm medium armored units as well. They've also allowed it now to destroy bug holes and fabricator buildings, which is pretty good. One of the fan favorites, the Eruptor, has also received a buff, boosting its damage by a whole 150 damage, going from 420 to 570. This should, in theory, be able to one-hit some of the units it wasn't able to previously, such as the Hive Guard, but also no longer take 3 shots to kill a Stalker, now only taking 2. But once again, those are just some random examples. It'll take some proper testing to find out all the changes. The R63 Diligence has also seen an increase in its durable damage from 10 to 25%, but now onto a big part of today's update. They've updated the recoil stance modifiers, so we went ahead and checked out their blog post to see exactly what that meant, and this is what it meant. I have some gameplay in the background to better exemplify what I'm trying to say. When you're standing still in Helldivers 2 in third person, you'll notice no change from before. However, when you're scoping down while standing still, you'll notice a 10% decrease in recoil. When moving and shooting in third person, you'll notice no change from before. However, even previously, you'd get a 50% increase in recoil when doing this. But when scoping down, moving, and shooting, you'll notice a 10% increase in recoil rather than 50%. Previously, you would notice no increase in recoil. When crouching and shooting in third person, recoil has increased by 10%. Crouching, scoping, and shooting now has the same exact recoil as third person. It previously didn't. When crouching, moving, and shooting in third person, you'll have the same recoil as if you were standing still and shooting. However, when doing all that but scoping down, you'll still get that 10% improvement to your recoil. And lastly, when proning, either scoped or unscoped, we've gotten a 10% improvement to recoil, bringing down our recoil down to only 40%. In other words, prone accuracy has been buffed and scoping in has been rewarded further. So always trying to aim down sights if you're concerned about your recoil. Now moving on to gameplay, they've removed the operation modifier that reduces stratagem slots by 1 entirely. And holy crap, that's amazing. They've gotten rid of it since it pushed players to just pick the 3 most meta stratagems and did not promote variety. I'm down for negative modifiers, I think they're amazing, but really in automaton planets on Helldive difficulty, I feel this modifier was present like 80% of the time. They've also gone ahead and disabled the retrieve essential personnel mission for the time being so they can work on it before reactivating it. Also, super samples. They now spawn on difficulty 6. This is to allow more casual players, or players that just want to have fun and not sweat bullets like some of us freaks do, but still be able to gather some super samples. SEAF artillery also received a buff. I know, it's kind of weird, right? But hey, I'll take it. It no longer can be gemmed by stratagem jammers or ion storms, and can even be used after the timer has run out when you supposedly can't use any stratagems, which is kind of awesome. Enemies in melee range of the gates in the evacuate high value assets mission will now attack it more consistently. They've also added the ability to chat from in-game menus and mission loading screen, and they've updated some first person crosshairs to improve readability. The new armor passive, Peak Physique, which improves melee damage by 50% and weapon ergonomics by 30%, has been implemented into the game. And that's coming with the new warband today. And onto planets and hazards we go. Spike plants have been reworked. In case you don't know what these are those little plants scattered around the map that once you touch them, they would make you bleed and would drain your health and stamina and slow you down a crap ton. Now these plants no longer cause bleed or stamina drain if hit by the plant's explosion or spikes, and it now pops 3 times, sending spikes everywhere, dealing increased damage. Fire tornadoes have also been changed. They no longer feel like they actively respond to player movement and should move more randomly. Thank God. And while a fire tornado takes place, enemy vision is reduced, player vision remains unaffected. This should allow fire tornadoes to be easier to deal with. Earthquakes, or as they call it, tremors. Tremors have had their spawning tweaked to be slightly more random. Tremors have also had their epicenter and effect range increased, and these changes should result in more situations where enemies far away from the player get stunned, as well as reducing how consistently the player has a tremor occur right next to them. They've also tweaked the visibility in the game. A lot of planets have had their fog amounts tweaked to be a bit less harsh and dense. These changes were done on desert planets such as Hellmire, Errata Prime, and Chort Bay, and also on highland planets as well, such as Virilia 5, Motar Bay, and Alshane. I don't know if that's how you pronounce that, but anyways. They've also tweaked those pesky bright light bulbs that would make those terminals blinding white and would force us to have to shoot them down to even see the terminal. And unexploded hellbombs have also had a tweak. They'll now blow up immediately if shot by heavy weaponry or a strong explosion, but will remain the same for small arms fire. Vegetation has also had a tweak. It now improves stealth play. Vegetation that's large enough to slow the player down now has an extra function. When inside the vegetation, Helldivers will be harder to detect, reducing their detection range by enemies. This effect stacks with other detection reducing effects such as nighttime, being crouched or prone, or things such as the Scout Armor passive. I know the stealth players are gonna love this one. They've also added additional video effects for ion storms, and onto enemies we go. The acid effect applied by hunters, bug mines, etc. now allows you to sprint while under the effect, and only slows you down by 30% rather than 50%. Duration has been increased from 3 to 4 seconds. And that's a much larger change than some people may realize, and may be the sole reason to make players like me not worry too much about shield generator packs anymore. They've also toned down heavy armored units again, like the Bile Titans and Chargers on higher difficulties, and instead spawn more hordes of smaller units. The difference should be quite noticeable, and the amount should be at least 30% less armored units than before during bug breaches. They've also toned down Hulk spawn rates, and the reason for all these changes is to ease up on the demand of anti-tank weapons and to allow more build varieties. I'm all in for it. Patrol spawns have also been officially reverted. Holy crap, that's a major change for solo players. In other words, if you're not in on all the news, what this means is now solo, duo, and trio players should see less patrols and enemies in general, making the game a bit easier. Stunning has also been nerfed. Medium and large units don't get stunned as easily. Now, there's also some Terminid specific changes. Spewers will now get slowed if they lose their legs, and they also now apply the acid effect. And these spewers can only damage Helldivers up to 4 times per second, minimizing those instances where we instantly get killed by spits. Bile Titans is slightly less durable against weaker anti-tank weapons, which is not a large change and will mostly only matter for weapons like the railgun. And just like the spewers, the puke can now only damage Helldivers 4 times per second. It did, however, get a bigger spread on its spit. The Charger Behemoth, which is the alternative version of the Charger, will now start spawning in higher difficulties. And for the automatons, the Hulk's flamethrower now deals less damage, reducing those instant kill moments just like the spewers. Also, the tank's armor value on the front has been lowered to be the same as the non-vent sections on the rear of the tank, and the vents on the back of the tank will now check for explosion directions correctly. Also, those pesky, annoying little kamikaze bots with the exploding jump packs have had their damage decreased by 50%. Thank God, I died far too many times to these little suckers. And lastly, supply lines are also now visible, which should make it a lot easier to understand, and we can also see which planet an attack is originating from, which will allow us to stop an attack at its source. Lastly, for the video, there were a crap ton of fixes. I'm not gonna read them all out. This video is already so much longer than I intended. In my opinion, these were the 3 largest fixes, but I'll link the patch notes in the description box below if you want to check out all the fixes. The 3 fixes were: the spear targeting has been reworked and should work much better. However, accidentally, it can no longer target bot fabricators. This is not intended, and they are working on it. The weapons on the exosuits have been changed, which will make their weapons far more accurate, and they finally fixed the unlimited grenade exploit, hopefully for good this time. And that'll be all for today's video. I'm not going to add any extra input as this video turned out to be quite long. Thank you, Helldivers, for watching this video. I'll be catching you on the next one. Peace!